Hey painting friends, it's Stoof here. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to do another cloud painting tutorial using acrylic paint. This is part of my painting clouds series. This is number 3, I believe, in the series of cloud painting tutorials using acrylic paint. This is the finished result. We have some big puffy cumulus clouds that like kind of are cumulonimbus maybe in the background, like they're building up into a storm. So a little different from the other clouds that we've painted so far. This tutorial will be in real time. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future painting tutorials like this one. All right, painting friends, let's take a look at our materials for today. I'm using a disposable paper palette here. My acrylic paint colors today are titanium white, phthalo blue, Mars black, ultramarine blue, Titan buff, yellow ochre, and dioxizane purple. I'm using a 9 by 12 inch canvas panel today, and for my brushes, we have a round tip brush, we have a flat tip brush about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, we have a smaller filbert brush, and we have this smaller flat tip brush. This is about a number 2 flat tip brush here. I also have a cup of water and paper towels for cleaning off my brushes. All right, now that we've looked at our materials, let's get started with this painting. All right, to get started, I'm going to use my small flat tip brush here, and I'm just going to sketch out the concept. So we're going to block in general shapes, and then we'll get started with painting in things farther in the distance and making our way to the foreground. So I'm going to dip my brush in the water just a little bit here, and we're going to start with some ultramarine blue. I'm just thinning that paint down with the water so it's not going to have too much texture when we put that on the little canvas panel here. So I'm going to put a little tick mark in here about where center is on the canvas panel. Maybe it's a little lower, somewhere in there. And I'm just going to put a little tick in the top, separating left and right. One at the bottom, left and right, separating. Move that down even a little more. Top and bottom on the right side, and top and bottom on the left side. So now we have 4 quadrants, and that's just going to help me explain to you guys where things are going to go. So our first big cloud here, looking at the shape, the bottom of the cloud comes down a little bit, like an inch or so from that central spot, and the base of this cloud is basically centered on the canvas here. So you got a little bit of space on the left and right side, and you don't have to make your cloud the exact same shape or the exact same as my cloud here. I'm just explaining this to you guys if you would like to make your cloud look that way. If you are a beginner, sometimes it helps to try to follow along as closely as you can. That's going to help you learn more with proportions and all that good stuff. All right, so the top of the cloud, we've got a little bit of blue sky peeking out over here. Basically from this tick mark, if we put another tick mark there to separate this in half, it kind of comes off a little bit higher. That's where it comes off the page. And then around center is where we'll have the top of the cloud starting to make its way back on the canvas. Got a couple little shapes here for the where the cloud meets the sky. This just comes in a little bit. And if you make like a diagonal, like you're going straight from the center point of the canvas to this corner, that's basically where it intersects there. Just so you can eyeball where things are on your canvas. And next, I'm just going to bring the shape out a little bit more, closer to the edge, and come down. So in general, that's the shape of that cloud that's closest to the viewer, kind of centered on the canvas. We have a couple more clouds visible in here. I'm going to put one right here that comes behind this guy. So from our halfway point, you want to go up about 1.5 inches or so, and this one's gonna just have a little bump and then come out above that point off the page. There's a nice highlight here. Let's actually bring that down a bit, so ignore that. Down another inch. Do a nice bump. Done a nice little bump right there. And it kind of just comes up back behind this cloud. And where it comes off is going to be just a little bit in from where this starts to curve up. And we're going to put a little line there for that shadow we're going to put in. And we've got another one behind it. Now the space between this and this is a little bit greater than the space between this and this, because as you're getting closer to the horizon, the clouds are getting farther in the distance, so we're starting to see less space between the clouds, and it's a little bit smaller and farther away from us, the clouds at the closer to the horizon line. Got another little spot right there. And we're going to do another one. And another one. So we just got rows of clouds that are visible from this spot. And then it gets kind of fuzzy in here. It's kind of raining in this section, so we don't quite follow the line all the way out. But there are a few little shadows that we're going to put over here. So if you put about 3 little lines there, that'll just mark where our shadows are going to go. And then it's raining, and we kind of don't really have any blue sky between the horizon and these clouds, so it just kind of fades into gray, and then we have our ground. So for the ground, I'm just doing, get a little bit more water here. You can just do like a little rounded hill. If you want to do a flat ground, you could do that too. I'm just giving a little something here, like 3 little baby hills. And this is going to be pretty dark at the ground. Obviously the focus is our sky for this painting. So if you don't even want to have any ground, then you could just bring the sky all the way down to the base of your canvas. And then we have one more cloud over here. So looking at the height of this cloud on the left side, this one doesn't quite go that high. It goes a little bit higher, just a little higher than center from top to bottom. And we've got that shape there. It kind of just meets up with that and comes off the page about there. And there's some more going on behind this cloud, but in general, now we have the basic shapes blocked in. So the next step is to put this brush away in the water. You don't want to leave those brushes sitting out while you're painting because they will dry and get all yucky. So we want to always put our brushes back in the water when we're not using them. All right, next we're going to start working on the sky. So I'm taking my flat tip brush. I'm going to take some phthalo blue. Now phthalo blue is typically a pretty strong color, so you might need more white than phthalo blue. But let's see, right now I did a little bit more white than phthalo blue. And that's giving me a pretty nice blue color. And I'm going to mix some ultramarine as well as some dioxazane purple and some ochre and some black and even more phthalo blue. I want to get a dark blue that's not like perfectly saturated. If you do just blue and white, then I think the saturation is going to look a little bit too strong for this kind of a sky. So I just mixed in a little bit more ultramarine blue, and I'm pretty happy with that color. So I'm going to start at the top of the canvas. It's pretty dark. And as we're putting this paint on the canvas, we're going back and forth with the brush, sometimes going up and down. I'm just trying to get good coverage, blocking right up to my outline of the cloud. If you cover it up a little bit, if you go over those lines, that's even better because we can always paint over that later. And don't worry about your visible brush strokes right now. We can touch up our brush strokes later. Make sure you use both sides of the brush. Flip the brush around as you're getting the paint on here. You want to get really good coverage. I'm using a decent amount of pressure, really getting that paint into the canvas. And now that I blocked this in and I got the outline, I'm going back over what I just put down very lightly. I didn't put any extra paint on the brush. I'm just blending in what I already have on the canvas. I'm using less pressure now and just picking up the brush with each swoop, and that's giving me this nice soft sky look where we don't quite see those brush strokes as much. And then I'm going to also cover the spot up here. Again, you don't want to leave any little white spaces. Okay, and then down here, same thing. So I stopped above, about an inch above our horizon line, or on our horizon line, sorry, our midpoint on the canvas. Okay, again, using both sides of the brush, getting all the paint in there. All right, so that's about where I'm stopping. Now I'm gonna mix in more white, and I started this right next to this blob. I didn't mix it right into that blob because if you do that, then you're just gonna end up having to use a lot more white. And I'm just mixing this in, and I'm going right up to my edge here, going about another inch down on the canvas. And right now you can see the difference between those two. So what I want to do now is just dab my paper towel, get the extra paint off, and just go back and forth, doing those one swooping motions and working my way up, pressing pretty gently and then going back down. And this is softening up that transition between that darker blue and this lighter blue that I put down. All right, I'm liking that, and I'm going to keep working my way down by adding even more white. And I can add a little bit more phthalo blue too, because it can get a bit more saturated now. Okay, and this is going to come right down to the shapes that we outlined here. And we don't really, this is all cloud on that side, so we don't have to worry about that. And again, get the extra paint off your brush, then lightly go over, does one sweeping brush stroke, make your way up, and that kind of blends right in. Okay, and down here we have a little bit more sky. Take a little bit more of that. I'm gonna mix just a little ultramarine in there. Still want the value to be lighter than that, obviously. All right, there we go, we're getting lighter, maybe even a little more white. Filling in these spaces here. All right, and we see this is all cloud over here, so we don't really get any sky, any blue sky visible there. All right, so we got that down. Now I'm going to take the extra paint off my brush. Just going to take some pure white, just a little bit, and I'm going to start to sweep over in a couple spots just to show, taking the extra paint off the brush again and very lightly pressing to show where we have a little bit of like different types of clouds or sky visible behind that. And then as we get down here, we're going to take some white. There's still a little bit of blue on my brush. I didn't really clean off my brush. A little bit of purple, just a little bit. Purple tends to be a pretty strong pigmented color as well. Depending on what brand you're using, it can vary. And then I took a tiny bit of ochre. There's still some blue coming off from before, from me not cleaning my brush, so that's good. Take a little bit of black and a little bit of this Titan color and see how different these are. So it's still like a bluish color if you look at it by itself, like a grayish blue. Take some white and we're just gonna fill in the space right above here, kind of mixing these two together. And this is like other clouds in the background and like a highlight on those clouds. I'm gonna take a little bit of white right here as well. I just blocked it into a couple little spots. Took the extra paint off my brush, and then I'm just gonna put the brush down at an angle, and I'm very lightly pressing here, and it's giving me a little bit more of a textured, not a soft blend, but a little bit more of a brushstroke, painterly type of blend. All right, so now we got the background stuff done. Now we can start to work on the clouds. So I'm going to put this brush away. My flat tip brush is going in the water. And we're going to start with the clouds that are farther away. And then the last thing we're going to do is this cloud in the foreground, because we want to start in the distance and make our way to the foreground. So starting with the clouds that are farther away, these two guys, we are going to start with the darker color for the shadow. So I'm using my round tip brush, mixing it in that spot that I had before. Some black, some ultramarine, some white. Let's try to just get this like neutral gray here first. Mixing more ultramarine. And keep in mind that when you're painting with acrylics, they tend to dry a little darker than what they look like when they're wet going onto your canvas. So with that in mind, I think this is a pretty good color here. I think I want just a little bit of phthalo blue in there too. There we go. Didn't change it too much, but just enough. Okay, so now we're going to get the base of this cloud. And this sky behind it is still wet on my canvas. It should still be wet on your canvas, but if it's not, then you're just going to do a little bit more of a dry brush technique where you use a little bit less paint, and you want to like lightly sweep your strokes over. But yeah, with the paint being wet here, I'm very lightly going back and forth over this spot, very, very gently pressing. And it's just giving me a little bit of a blend. I can then build up a little bit more with the shadows later. I'm going to take a little bit more white for this spot, right there. I'm just blocking in where my shadows are. Get a few of them here. And whenever you get to an edge, if you want to have a softer edge, then just go back and forth with the brush. Do a couple little sweeping motions where you kind of pick up the brush. So you do press and sweep, and that'll give in. You want to pick up the brush, like use less force towards the end of the swoop, and that'll give you also a softer look there. All right, and then I'm going to take the extra paint off this brush. Take some whites, tiny bit of purple, just a really little bit. I just want a hint of purple in there. Keeping the pretty cool tone. And then we're going to just build that up a little. Take a little more white. I'm very gently pressing here, just barely getting that paint on there. It's giving me that nice soft look. Okay. Build that up there a little bit too. All right, so those are shadows. I'm going to take the extra paint off this brush. It's pretty clean brush. If you want to rinse it off completely and then dry it, you can do that too if you don't want any of the gray to come onto the brush. But as you can see, I don't really have much gray on mine because I wiped it down pretty good. All right, so now I'm getting the highlights in. So I'm going over these spots at the top where the cloud meets the sky. And I just blocked in those shapes for now. No blending yet. Now I'm going to take the extra paint off my brush, and we can do a little bit of blending here. So that, like I said, this blue sky is still a little bit wet. I want it to be a little soft, but not too crazy soft. And I think after doing those couple little brush strokes, I want to try switching to this. I put my round tip brush in the water. I'm going to switch to my little filbert brush. And starting with this filbert brush that's just perfectly clean, I'm just going at the edges here, kind of pressing around, pulling some paint. And it's giving me a little bit softer look there. Now we can take a little bit more white, layer that up. Okay, getting the extra paint off the brush. Now we want to blend into our shadows here. So for the shadows, just making these little brush strokes, tiny little brush strokes, going in different directions to soften things up a bit. I'm going to put another little highlight right in there. Just a bunch of tiny little brush strokes. Dab, 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 dab. Okay, so that's a really soft looking cloud now. I want to leave it like that for now. Take a little bit more white actually and just touch up this spot. Maybe add a little bit more highlight here so it can stand out from that other cloud. And whenever you want to have like a sharper highlight without a blend, you just take more of that light color and just dab it, layer it up like that. All right, so there's that. Now we're going to go over to this cloud. So I'm going to put that brush back in the water. I'm going to get my round tip brush back out, clean it off, and we're going to start. This cloud doesn't quite have a huge change. Doesn't quite have as much shadow to light contrast. So I'm taking white and mixing it in that spot I had, taking a little bit more of my ultramarine blue. I'm going to take even more white. I want that a little lighter. And we're just filling in this base area here. Going right up to the edge of this cloud. Bottom half of that's all filled in. Taking the extra paint off of my brush. Let's take some white. And we can get the top of this cloud now. And this is starting to dry more, so you'll get to see what I was talking about with more of that dry brush. I want to lighten this section up a little more over here. So there's a decent amount of paint on there now. I took the extra paint off of this brush, and we're just going to push it around. Just get that little flake of paint off of there. There we go. All right, so we're just going to very gently press. All these tiny little brush strokes I was talking about, it's the same thing. And then I'm going to take my smaller filbert brush, that's that semi-rounded brush, and that's how we're going to touch up the top of this one. You want to have that brush pretty dry. And just go right up at the edges. Gonna do a little sweep with the brush. So right now you can kind of see how that white is layering over. You can still see the blue underneath. So all we do for that is just layer it up really. So we're taking a little bit more of our Titan buff. I'm just layering over that. Looking good. Gonna take the extra paint off my brush, soften that up a little more there. And I'm gonna take a little bit more of this nice Titan color and just touch this up and give it a little bit more highlight. A couple spots there. All right, cool, so these two clouds are done. Now let's work on our clouds down here. So I'll just keep using this filbert brush. If you wanna go back to your round tip brush, you can. Since I'm starting with things that are a little smaller down here, I'm gonna use this brush just because it's a little smaller will help me get that smaller details in. All right, so I mixed in a little bit more ultramarine blue, and I'm going back and forth here. As I get to the edges, I'm just gently pressing. Gonna mix a little ochre in with that. Going right down to my horizon line where the ground meets the sky. Back and forth with the brush, getting good coverage on the canvas. I'm gonna mix in a little more white. And this is where it's kind of like hazy, raining. You can't really tell exactly what's going on here. And I'm just going back and forth with the brush, letting it blend up. And as we're making our way up, I'm gonna mix in a little bit of phthalo blue right here as we get to that little shadow, and bring this right up to the base of this cloud right there. I'm doing circles now with the brush strokes, as you can see, and that's just giving me I'm using a decent amount of pressure, so it's giving me a good coverage on the canvas. And once I get those little circles in there, now I'm just doing more like little swoops where I lift the brush. But I do want to get some textured brush strokes in here just to show that puffiness in the cloud. I don't want to have smooth back and forth brush strokes. That's what we want for the nice sky. But for the clouds, we want a little bit more volume and texture, depth. Okay, so we got that base area filled up. Now we've got a couple more little shadows where we put those lines in earlier. So I'm going to take a little bit of black and white. Purple, just a little bit of purple. See, I put just a little bit there and it really blended in. So now I'll just have to mix more of my other colors in there to offset that. So I put a little bit more phthalo, white and black in. I'm going to put a little bit more of my ochre in there as well. And just a tiny bit more purple. Maybe a tiny bit more black. I want it to be a little darker and a little bit more, let's do some ultramarine as well. There we go. That's more, and ochre. There. Okay. So next, let's fill in these shapes where we have our shadows. A couple little shadows right there. And this kind of fades into this color here. I'm gonna do this shadow. Another little one's kind of right there. While I'm still over here, I'm going to get the extra paint off my brush and let this blend into my nice dark rainy spot, or I guess it's lighter in value than this. And just blending this up into that. A couple other little spots here. I want to soften up the edge. Just going over it in little swirly motions to soften that up a little bit. Swooping. Okay, and then I'm going to get these shadows over here. They're a little darker over there, so I'm going to mix a little bit more black and phthalo. A little more black. And we'll just put this right here. I think I need a little more black. All right, this one's going there. We got another dark one right in here. So just use those lines that you sketched to pinpoint where your shadows will be. And this also kind of fades into this. So if this is already drying too much for you, you can mix more of your white, a little bit of purple, we'll tighten, and just kind of blend it in by reblending the color and really gently pressing here. You want it to just softly kind of fade into that other cloud. Put a little highlight under there, keeping it puffy, keeping that texture nice and soft. Even a little bit more white right in there. A little bit more white. Still keeping those nice swirling motions. And we're going to blend these up into having a little bit of more light, kind of fading into this part of the cloud, and we want to leave that sharper there. Another little one here. I'm just going to take a bit more of my phthalo sky color and white, and put a little bit of this here. I think that's a little too blue, so I'm going to take some more black, purple, and ochre. So mixing purple and ochre together really will tone down any saturation that you have. It just like neutralizes everything. And we're going to move this back and forth with the brush, building it up, covering up all the white space. I'm going to take the extra paint off my brush, get some white, just a little purple, and touch this up over here on this side, lightening things up a bit. So we have a good contrast between the light and dark there. These are supposed to soften up. All right, that's looking nice. Now let's move over to this side, take some more white, a little bit of tighten, just a little, tiny bit of purple. Just a tint, just a little bit. Okay, and then starting down here, we don't want to have any pure white down here this far away. Even though things are lighter in value, you want to have less contrast between light and dark here. So if you do like a pure white here, it's going to be way too much and it's going to draw your attention here instead of here, where we want to focus a little bit more on this big cloud. All right, so I'm letting these blend out. Do another little highlight in here. Took the extra paint off my brush so I could just blend it up into the shadow a bit more. Back and forth. Little sweeping motions. And this is going to blend down. I'm going to mix a little more of that blue. And then we're just going over this, blending it in. And this is not an easy thing to do. I think I'm making it look easier than it might be for a lot of other people. Because I've been painting clouds for, you know, probably 20-something years, and it's a lot of practice. So if you guys are struggling right now or you're frustrated, then just keep working and let yourself finish the painting. Don't let yourself get too caught up on one thing that's not going well for you. And once you finish the painting, let it sit for like a week and then go back and like try this tutorial again or try another cloud tutorial of something very similar. And see how well you do on that time when you're practicing. And that tends to be the best way to help you grow and learn and see your improvement instead of just feeling like you're struggling. All right, so I'm taking more of that white, going right up to the base of this cloud. Gonna mix a little bit of tighten in there. And we got a puffy cloud here. Taking the extra paint off after I did a couple little brush strokes. Really gently pressing, doing these little swooping motions. Okay. I like that. Now moving over here, we got another little highlight. It's lighter in value than this behind it, so we want to make sure of that. So yep, that's lighter, it looks good. Cover that up. Just cover up all this space while you're there. Now get the extra paint off the brush. And now we blend. So if you want to blend that in, you could, and it dried already, then you could mix that color again. This kind of just blends out, fades into this cloud behind it. And this one's going to have a little bit harsher, more defined edge, less blurry, less fuzzy. So I'm going to build that up more in a bit. I'm going to take a little bit more purple and just get this transition in here going, purple and ochre. And a little bit more of that blue, because we do want to transition down to this color. Pull that up a little. So see, it's really starting to give us a bit of depth. Have these highlights and shadows. All right, so I'm going to let that sit for a bit, and I'm going to boost that highlight a bit more in a little while. Now let's work on this cloud. So we're going to take some black, some phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, a little white, do more ultramarine blue. This is going to be a pretty dark shadow right there. That's a pretty good color. So we're going to start at the base, where we've got a couple little deep shadows at the base of this cloud. And I'm just going back and forth with the brush. See these little motions? And I'm holding the brush down the whole time. And it's giving me that nice, softer, fuzzy cloud look. Same thing here, I'm doing little circles, trying some back and forth, going back to circles. Just getting nice coverage. I'm gonna take the extra paint off this brush and touch up a couple little edges here. So I'm gonna drag the paint down, give it a little bit more of that puffy cloud look. You don't want to have like a super sharp, harsh line there. All right, now we're gonna mix in a little bit more white and a little bit of purple. That was too much, just a little bit. And a little bit of ochre. A little bit of Titan. Okay, and we're still making our way up. Doing these little sweeping motions, really pushing the brush. I'm still using that filbert brush, by the way. Pushing the brush into the canvas, but the value is a little lighter than what we had at the base of that cloud. And we're sticking close to center from left to right for that shadow. Still pressing in circles. There's not a lot of paint on my brush, but there is enough to cover up that white space and enough for me to get these fuzzy edges. Okay, now we've got another big one up here. I'm going to mix a little more ultramarine and white for that one. And this one, I'm doing those back and forth swirling motions using both sides of the brush to get the paint onto the canvas. This one kind of just covers up this whole area. And there's a little bit more of something like that. I'm just going to mix a tiny bit more black in and white and a little Titan color. So the value and color are slightly different from those two. And we're just getting this shadow blocked in here. This kind of comes right down to this one. And we've got a shadow that's a little deeper right in there. Just mixing a little more of my sky color. Okay, so we got our shadows for that big one. I'm going to keep using this brush, and we're going to take some white, teensy bit of purple, and ochre, and ultramarine blue. Let's do a tiny bit more ochre. So you get that like neutral grayish blue color. And that's what I'm going to use right here. I like that a lot. Actually, I'm going to do more ochre. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, and maybe even a little more white as we're getting closer to the top of this cloud. Just pushing the paint. Different little sections there. Pulling the paint down. You want it to have, some sections are kind of blended, some sections are a little bit puffier. I'm going to take a little bit more phthalo blue, just a tiny bit, that was too much. And that's what I want for down here, so it's a little bit lighter than that dark gray, but more blue. It's a little more blue than what we had before. And just going to drag this out a little over the sky. Took the extra paint off my brush, and I'm just softening up these edges a little bit. Gently pressing, dabbing, just to get puffy looking border. Going back with a little more paint, touching it up a couple spots. And we're going to build some highlights up. It's going to give this even more depth later on, but for now, we're on the right track. All right, I mixed in a little bit more ultramarine blue for this section right here. I want this to kind of blend in. Taking extra paint off my brush. Just pushing the paint around. There's barely any paint on my brush. I'm just getting a little bit of blending here. Okay, right here I'm going to take more of that purple and ochre. Mix some white in there so you can see that's pretty warm compared to the blue. So I'm going to mix a little bit of ultramarine in there. A little bit more tighten. And let's see how that looks. Yeah, I like that. Okay. So this I'm just blocking in, covering up all the white space. Same with this spot, covering up that white space. On the canvas. And then we're going to blend this back down into that darker color. So I'm re-blending some blues with my black. White. And I'm just going over that section that I just had, letting it softly blend. Going to carry that over in front of this cloud a little. Softening, covering up the white space. Let's take a little more ochre, purple. Just to re-blend that. Going back and forth with the brush strokes. And it's kind of dark. Got some little darker sections right in here. I'll let these blend a little more. I'm going to take a little bit more of my white. Blend it in with those colors we had. Try to build that highlight up a little more. Just get a little more balance. Keep things soft. Layering up a little. Let's do a little softer highlight right down here too. And I'm just going to puff up a couple little swirling motions in this spot. Right there. Alright, that looks nice. Maybe a little bit more right in here just to, so it doesn't look too flat. Okay, I like that. And we're going to layer this up again more later. Just going to build up a shadow a little more, so just touching up the shadow. Doing a couple little dabs there. All right, now we can work more on these highlights. So I'm going to take more of my white, my tighten, and just start right up here. There's still a little blue on my brush. I didn't clean off my brush. Going right up to the edges, letting it give me kind of puffy edge. Pushing the paint around with a lot of force in the brush here just to get that textured look. Gonna let this blend by using less pressure. Still keeping the brush on the canvas, swirling it around. Letting it blend into some spots and picking the brush up with less pressure in other spots. Didn't have to add any new paint onto my brush. I'm still blending what's on here. Getting a little bit more of that bluish color. It's gonna be a little more shadowy down here. And again, going over that spot where it meets the sky to get that edge softened up. Okay, that looks nice over there. Let's move up here. Taking a little more white. Pushing the paint, lifting it up. And like I said, we're going to go back and do some highlights later. For now, I'm just getting like more of like a mid-tone highlight. We're going to really build up the highlights though to give this cloud some depth in a little bit. Pushing the paint right at the edges here, using a decent amount of pressure. Take some more white and tighten. Doing little swirling motions here to keep building up some highlights. Cover up those spots where we can see the sky. Blending this down to the shadow. Pushing the paint around. Letting it build that depth, but still leaving some of this shadow here. Can go back and take a little bit of white and more of that sky color. Let's do a little more ultramarine blue. And you can rebuild that shadow if you covered up a little too much there. Build a little more. I'm just gonna, I think it's a little hint too blue, so I'm gonna take a little bit more of my ochre and purple. Just touch that up a little. Build up another little shadow right here, here. The trick with the clouds is you don't want to have like just one big blob of a color if you're going for this more realism style look. There's always like a little subtle variation or shadow somewhere. Lots of little transitions. I'm going to take a little bit more black, ultramarine blue, and can touch up this shadow, build up that shadow some more. And this paint's all pretty dry down here, so it's just really gently going around to try to get that depth. Take a little more white, phthalo. And I'm going to build up this shadow again some more too. Do my little swirling motions, lifting up the brush as I put down those little swirls. Okay. And now we can do more of our highlights. I'm going to use my smallest brush, my number 2. Actually, you know, before I go to highlights, let's just get the bottom covered. So I'm going to go back to my flat tip brush. And for the ground down here, it's pretty simple. We're just going to take some phthalo blue, black, and ochre. More phthalo blue and a little bit of white. So it's not pure black. And that just gives us, like, a little more ochre. It gives us like a neutral greenish but still in shadow. And you can just push the brush around so you're not having like a super smooth edge where the ground meets the sky. And like I said before, if you're not even planning on including any grass or trees or forest or base land, then just ignore this part. This is pretty quick, easy part. And you can do a little bit more white and ochre if you want to just give a little bit more depth down here. Just real quick. All right, there's our land. Okay, now going back to our smallest brush here, I'm going to take some more white and some Titan. And just a tiny, tiny bit of purple again. All right, we can start, let's mix a little more white in there. I think it's, whoops. Mix a little more white. There we go. And now we're gonna take the brush and just dabble it to give us some really nice highlights right near the edge, not quite on the edge, but close to the edge. And I'm using less pressure as I'm coming down. Here, there's less paint on the brush, and that's helping to give me, taking just some pure white here too, that's helping to give me that transition from really bright highlight to softer. And anytime you want to blend one of these highlights out, just use less pressure and less paint. Getting the extra paint off my brush. And another good tip is not to overdo your highlights. If you make them too bright, or if they take up too much space, sometimes that's pushes it too far, and then it's not really realistic looking. Again, you gotta add some shadows if you do that. Just picking some select spots where I see some more light. Just using pure white over here. And it's kind of blending down. I'm gonna come back and blend this stuff. A little more of a highlight over here. I'm going to take a little bit of ultramarine so it's not pure white, but I still want it to be pretty light. Just building up those highlights right in there. And let's soften up the edge on that. Let's take some pure white, build up highlight in here, right in there and up here. So I just dab some paint down. I'm going to get the extra paint off my brush and go back and blend this in. Again, you don't want to have any super harsh lines. You want things that kind of be softer. Not using too much paint. All right, that's looking nice. Let's go back and work on this area here. So I'm going to mix my white with just that little bit of ultramarine. And we'll touch up this spot again. Getting the extra paint off. Touch up this spot again. Mix a little more white in there. Right in here, use some white. Get this cloud again. Okay, down here it's got a little bit of that ultramarine. Let's mix a little bit of our grayish purple and ochre in there too. And we'll just touch up a couple little spots down here very loosely, quickly. Alright, things are still pretty dark over there. Can build a little bit more up, taking a bit more ultramarine blue. Now we'll just touch up this little highlight on this cloud. And I'm going to go back with just some pure white again. Just keep building up my highlights up here. Now that that's down, I'm gonna touch up and blend a little more. Doing little swirling motions. And we can touch up a couple more little shadows if we want. But we're getting close to the finish line, guys. Just add a few more little shadows in there. Oops, a little bit too much blue. All right, we're getting pretty close. So at this point, you guys can just kind of look at your own painting, you know, step back from it for a minute if you need to, and see how you feel about it. I'm gonna try to find a good balance. Sometimes it's hard to tell when it's done. So try to find like a good balance of highlight and shadow. You want to have a decent amount of depth. What you get from your highlights and your shadows and your contrast. And just a little more in there. Alright guys, and with that, I'm going to call this a finished painting. Alright guys, that wraps up this painting tutorial of how to paint some cumulus clouds with kind of like cumulonimbus stuff happening in the background there. It's definitely like rainy or hazy, something's going on back there. And they're pretty big, puffy clouds. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found this information helpful. I think I'm going to have one or two more cloud painting tutorials in this series. I have the other cloud painting tutorials in the description under this video if you're interested in seeing other types of clouds and how to paint them. If you have recommendations for future painting tutorials, leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of this tutorial. I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback. Have a wonderful day and happy painting! Bye-bye!